We now arrive at relative positioning. Relative positioning, I think, is the harder to understand and apply of the four methods. So let me slow down and provide some more examples on this positioning method. Relative positioning changes the position of the HTML element relative to where it would normally appear based on its place in the normal flow of the document. If we had a header that appears at the top of our page, we could use relative positioning to move it a bit to the right and down a couple of pixels. Use top or bottom and left or right to move the element relative to where it would normally occur in the document. The content of a relatively positioned element can be moved over other elements, but the reserved space for the element is still preserved in the normal flow. So I have an example here of H3 content as well as a paragraph content here in my body, one on top of the other. Notice that the paragraph content is indented over here to the right, and the reason for that is I've relatively positioned the paragraph content to be 100 pixels from the left edge of the browser window and 100 pixels down. One interesting trick is to apply a relative positioning of left 0 and top 0 to see where the normal position would be. And there it is right there. Let's go back and position the H3 tag to relative from absolute, like so. And let's position it 0 pixels from the top and 0 pixels from the left to see where it would normally reside on the page right there. So all things being equal, for example, if I set this to static positioning for both of them, this would be the position that they would occupy, all things being equal, with no positioning established, static. Now let's go ahead and position my paragraph relative. Let's move it down 100 pixels from its normal position and left 100 pixels. So now it's going to move. Yep, looks like it disappeared. I have a mistake here in the code. Oh, I have it 1,000 pixels. Let's move that to 100 pixels, and there it is. 100 pixels down from where it would normally be, and 100 pixels to the right of where it would normally be. And if we change the position of H3 to absolute, just to show you the differences between these settings. By the way, this is the best way to learn these relative versus absolute positioning, is to just set up some elements and try different combinations. So let's set this to absolute positioning, and let's move this 200 pixels from the top, and notice that I have a spelling mistake here. Let's spell this correctly, absolute positioning. This will now move it, notice, below the paragraph. So this is where the positioning comes into play. In the normal flow, my H3 would be on top of my paragraph tag, or my paragraph content. But because I'm positioning this using CSS, I've rearranged the position here in the browser. Now, at first introduction, it may appear that the position relative is not very useful, but it does perform an important solution for certain types of CSS page layouts. For example, here I have two boxes, gray and this red outline box. The red outline is defined by a class called .box with these properties. Notice the position is relative, and right now I've set it to the left 0, top 0 position. So it's relative to the gray container, which is referred to up here in my CSS as #container. That's an ID. It is positioned, notice, in a static way because there's no definition here. So it's statically positioned on the page, and you can see that by adjusting the top and left values here, let's do top 10 pixels, that this now moves over 10 pixels, oh, actually 10 pixels from the left. Let's move it 10 pixels from the top as well. So you can see that I can very precisely position the red box relative to the gray box. Now you can also use negative numbers, and where this may come into play is, let's say that you have a navigation bar here and you don't want the navigation bar to ever cover the content. Well, you can set this in a relative position to the content so that if this content does move, the menu bar will move with it. So let's take our box and let's set this to negative 210 pixels. Actually, that's probably too much. Let's take this to negative 50 pixels. And you can see that I can move this off the top of the content area there so it doesn't overlap. I would need to tweak this a little bit more. Let's go with maybe 60 pixels. Still needs a little bit more. Now I can also position this gray div absolutely so that it moves further down the page. Let's go ahead and move this 75 pixels to the top there. So now notice that there's no overlap between these two. Now if I go back here and I set up an absolute positioning for this first gray container, right here, position absolute, and notice if I move this from 100 pixels to 200 pixels, both boxes now move in concert. So I never have to worry about the content in this red box overlapping the content in the gray box. Now what will happen, especially in Internet Explorer, is sometimes div elements will float around a little bit, so you can apply this relative positioning so that if they do float, very important content won't overlap each other. So that's one use for this relative positioning, among many, many others. The positioning schemes and properties covered in these last several movies are important and useful, but to get the most out of your CSS-based web page layouts, you'll need to learn how to float your content, which is the next topic.